Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Well, I hope you all are doing okay. I know that it's a super weird time and you guys are in the thick of it. So I hope you're staying safe and well, all of that. Um, yeah, so I thought that I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself first, maybe. I'm I teach music technology at Whitman College, which is a small private liberal arts school in Walla Walla, Washington. So I'm on the other side of the country in a relatively small town as well. Um, I, in addition to teaching the music technology classes, I'm also a bassist, and I teach bass lessons and such at the college as well. But I'm also our recording engineer for the department. Prior to teaching here, which I've done for the last 8, 9 years, I played in a band based out of Boston called Stepanian that toured quite a bit and all that kind of stuff. So I made a couple of records as an artist, and then got interested in the studio as a result of that. When as I kept working with that, it I found that I actually liked being in the studio quite a bit, both as a musician and as a recording engineer, producer, mixer, whatever. Um, so consequently, I spent a bit of time in studios out there. And then when my wife and I decided to move back west, I'm actually from out here. My wife is the executive director of the local symphony here. Um, when we decided to move back out west, I started a small studio, and it's nothing to look at really. We moved this summer, which is part of why what I'm looking at is kind of a dingy basement. Um, but coming out here was interesting because I ended up being sort of on my own in terms of recording studio work and all of that, and trying to make my own kind of path through this in a relatively small community. Our town is about 35,000 people or so, so it's not very big. We're 4 hours from Seattle, 4 hours from Portland, 4 hours from Boise. So we've got a ways to go before we get to any like major population centers. But it's ended up working out pretty well in terms of a business career approach to be out here. What I have found is that I have done a bunch of records for local artists, and then as that's gotten a little bit better, I've done a few records for people who had at least independent label contracts, that kind of deal. But most of the work that I do isn't quite what I envisioned. When I moved out here, my plan was to, produce rock singer-songwriter records, that kind of thing. That's really my wheelhouse as a musician. Um, and there are, a handful of independent bands in any group, or a handful of good, bands in any particular area. But that work isn't the majority of what I do. The majority of what I do is actually either live sound engineering. It's a relatively strong tourist community here, or was at least. It's a wine area, so we have 150 wineries here in this relatively small valley. So there are a fair number of concerts. So I do a lot of live sound engineering, and I also do a lot of classical recording, specifically classical concerts, and a couple of albums as well. Like I said, I'm a bassist. I grew up playing actually the saxophone, but then switched to bass in high school. And I've played in orchestras. I played a lot of jazz. I teach jazz bass, is specifically what I teach at the college. And I've always been drawn to that. And what I found was that specializing in something like that I wasn't expecting to specialize in has been a really rewarding experience. And it's also been, well, artistically rewarding, but also career wise. There are a lot of small organizations that record their concerts. If for no other reason than archival use, but most of the time they use them to get grants. Um, and what I record for a couple of choirs around this local area, and then I don't travel that far, usually just an hour or two to get to clients. But we've the directors of these groups that I've talked to have talked about how they have an easier time getting grants, or at least presenting themselves better, because they have good recordings starting off the bat. And that goes for, I mean, that's true in larger cities for sure, but the value of a good recording is really is actually really quite high for these organizations because they rely heavily on grants and all that kind of stuff. They might not be releasing them in the same way that, you think about a record being released. But so anyway, those are the kind of the main things that I do. Like I said, I was really surprised to get into, well, the classical recording stuff I actually kind of envisioned from the get-go because I had an interest in it. And I realized even from my time in Boston that there really aren't that many people that do that work. In Boston, there's a handful of people that I can think of right now. And Boston's a pretty strong town for all of that. But when we came out here, I mean, there was literally no one doing it. Or if they were putting you know, maybe a simple little Zoom recorder up on a stand. So nothing with like good microphones and all that kind of stuff. So there was definitely a market to break into there. The other side of the spectrum that I really didn't expect to be working in is the live sound aspect. Having come up as a player primarily, and then moving into production and audio engineering as a kind of secondary career, having the experience as a performer has given me a different edge on doing live sound, largely because I'm aware of what it feels like to be a musician and have bad sound. You always want it to be good, and so that's the goal, right? Is make things sound as good as possible and be honestly friendly. Because I remember when we'd tour and I'd get like the surly sound person, and there's nothing worse. I mean, it really isn't an enjoyable experience for anybody. So you might as well, be nice. It's really what it comes down to. Um, yeah, and then my main thing, honestly, is teaching. I never expected to teach at a college. I never expected to teach at this specific college. But it's worked out that way. And I found that I really, really enjoy teaching. It's relatively stable in an industry that's full of freelance and piecemeal work. Teaching is awfully, awfully nice to have a contract on a purely business perspective. But yeah, um, I'm really curious to know about all your backgrounds and what kind of stuff you're interested in, what sort of things you're doing. Would it be okay to ask a few of you to chime in?
Yeah, who wants to share?
I'll
Uh,
share.
oh, somebody wants
Oh,
to
you
say.
could go first. You could go first.
Yeah, okay, so let's do Jamie and then we'll do Devin. Is that cool?
All
Yeah.
right. Hey, I'm Jamie Forrester. I'm a recent graduate of SAE. Actually, I graduated like in August of last semester. But I've always I music is kind of like my hobby, but I want it to kind of turn into like what I do full time. But I'm just trying to like get my like I'm good at engineering somewhat, but I'm trying to like kind of just learn more about like the career path and stuff. But what I've noticed like from talking to a lot of different people, it's kind of like you kind of just go into it and then you just like somewhat grow. It's not really like a set path like you can follow. So I'm just trying to kind of figure out how I can get into it and maybe get into a studio and start mixing, or I don't know. I'm just trying to get my feet wet in the music industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the hardest part, right? Is getting in the door. And I think that continues to be the hardest part for every aspect of music, whether you're a performer or a recording engineer or a producer or whatever. Um, and the way that I ended up doing it, I mean, I can only speak to myself from my personal experience and from some of my students' experiences. But what I ended up doing was, I think in a weird way, had an advantage by having been a performer to begin with, in that I had made, two or three records, and I really hit it off with the producer of our first record. And I asked him if I could just come watch him mix. And then I asked him, when we were making our second album, I asked him if I could, just when we started, it was like, can I ask you anything while we're doing this? And he was totally cool with that. So I learned a little bit more about like, well, why'd you put the microphone here in front of the guitar? Like, what are you trying to do with this? That all ended up being a great learning experience for me. I don't think it drove him too crazy. I had a good relationship with him, and we seemed like friends pretty quickly, which was super encouraging. It was total happenstance ultimately that we picked this guy who ends up being like one of my really good friends. I've known him for a little over 15 years now. Um, and after a little while, I kept asking questions, and I kept asking like, hey man, can I just come watch you mix this thing? Or if you ever need help on anything, just call me. And so I ended up assisting on a couple of sessions. He runs a really small studio. So, two rooms plus an ISO booth in a converted garage, basically. But nice stuff done. He's done good work. I asked to just help with anything, and he called me a couple of times. He called me a couple of times when he had equipment breakdown. He's a small operation, and I had a mobile unit. All of that kind of stuff. The other thing that I did was I tried to leverage any connections I had through friends. And that always sounds really opportunistic to say leveraging connections, but it's kind of true. My wife was in the classical music industry, which is a big part of why I do classical recording. She hooked me up with the people who were recording her concerts for Boston Youth Symphony. And then she also worked at Boston Symphony too, so I met those guys. I assisted on one project recording, I don't know, Radcliffe College's orchestra or something like that at Harvard. And I learned so much in that one day. And all that I did with assisting was call the guy, Tom Stevenson was his name. And I knew he had an assistant. I was like, hey, can I just observe? I'm happy to help or whatever. And again, he was another good one for asking questions. He didn't mind that I asked a lot of questions. That's a tricky one, right? Because if you ask too many questions, it can be a little bit overwhelming for people. I think it's all about establishing a rapport early with somebody. And then finally, the other thing I did was I applied for an internship at a studio in Boston. It was a fairly short-lived internship. I mean, I was kind of old when I did it. I think I might have been 30 when I did that internship. And I learned some stuff. I learned I didn't want to work at that studio is what I really learned. But it was good to get out. In the end, I just asked to record my friends' bands. That was hard in a little apartment in Boston where we had other people to contend with all the time. But in a weird way, being forced to just kind of do it on your own kind of helped. Do you have artists that you work with or artist friends or anything like that that you can offer to do stuff for?
Yes, I actually going to the school. I have like a couple friends that do work in the studio. You kind of just sparked that thought back in my mind. Like I probably do need to do an internship or connect with someone, like network and connect with some of my friends that are like working in that space and kind of talk to them and see what get some of their advice.
Yeah, I always hate the hustle aspect of it all, but I mean, there's a fair amount of that, especially when getting started. I was just thinking about that the other day too, because like I said, I'm in a small area, and I've been here for long enough now that I've kind of done what I feel like I can do here, other than the ongoing projects, and I want to break into the Seattle and Portland markets a little bit more, because I mean those are obviously a whole lot bigger places with great music scenes, and just trying to go through my list of contacts that I know that I'm friendly with. It helps to be friendly. I mean, I can't stress that enough, that like if you're good to hang out with, or like just generally and trying to be a nice person and respectful of the other person's like perspective and everything, that goes such a long way. I'm confident that I got hired because I was friendly to people, not because I was good. Everybody's good to some degree. I remember the best piece of advice I got from my college jazz band instructor was that he played in New York in the 80s as a trombonist, and his comment was always, I got called because I could play, but everybody can play. He's like, I got the call because I showed up on time and sober. And that was literally all that it took. And that he was a good guy, right? I can't stress like that enough. Be a fun person to hang around with. That's always a big thing. And be on time. says the guy who was 3 minutes late to the meeting, but oh well. I'm talking about myself here, by the way, not anybody else.
No, you're right. You're right. That was some good advice. Thank you. I'm gonna reach out to like some of my friends and stuff.
Totally. You never know when somebody knows somebody is the other thing. Because like one of my friends, like I didn't realize that his buddy was the chief booker at like one of the bigger venues in Boston for a while. And you'd be surprised at how it really doesn't take that many contacts to get somebody who's there. And if you've got a friend who can put a word in with you with one of their friends, that goes a long way. Word of mouth is huge, even I'm sure in a city, particularly in a small town. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, Devin, you want to share?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Devin. I'm pretty much new to all of this. Like, I never, before when I was young, I never really had plans on doing anything with music until now. Because as I got older, I realized music was like my therapy. If I was happy, sad, no matter what, I would always go to music. So I decided if I was gonna get a diploma, something when I get a diploma that has to do with something with school. So Dr. Dre was always one of my inspiration when it came to music. Like I basically want to do almost everything he does. Um, I want to have my own record label, mix, produce beats, all that stuff. But I'm also interested in trying live sound because that also seems pretty cool too. I also realized like the mixing aspect part of it. The more I understand Pro Tools, the more I enjoy mixing. So that's pretty much cool too. That's cool too. And I also like the fact that you say you was a guitarist because that was always one of the instruments that I always wanted to learn how to play. So I want to learn how to get started. So if you could give me any tips on how to start learning how to play a guitar or electric guitar, any type of guitar, it don't really matter. I just want to get a start on a guitar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all that stuff is great. Well, on the guitar front right now, I mean, the biggest thing is to just have an instrument. If you can borrow an instrument, if you own an instrument, that's awesome. Like borrow and steal a cheap guitar is totally worth it. Well, don't steal, but I feel compelled to say that. But the rest of it
Yeah.
is all good. Fender is doing 3 months of free lessons right now on their online site. And right now, given that everybody's under some sort of you know, isolation aspect, that's probably a pretty strong option for learning right now. I have a couple of students in my other classes who are, taking guitar lessons on there, and it seems to work pretty well. Um, Otherwise, I learned to play. I learned to play the bass by listening to U2 records. I listened to Joshua Tree over and over again to learn all the bass lines on it. And they're super simple bass lines, which is part of why it was an easy record to learn from. So, just find music that you like and try to play along with it, even if it's super simplified from what it is. You mentioned Dre and Dr. Dre, and he is so talented in so many areas. And he's put in the time in so many areas too. Because did you watch that? There's an HBO documentary, The Defiant Ones. It's about him and Jimmy Iovine. Have you seen that? Has anyone seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that, and it has Eminem in it too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I've seen that.
what I was really struck by with him is Dre's super thoughtful for starters. He's a good musician. He's a good piano player, and you don't ever really. I think you don't hear that so much in the music that he's done, but I think everything he does is informed by the fact that he's got such a strong musical sensibility. He also, compared with everybody else in the hip hop scene in that era, like really, really focused on sound quality. And he did it by not sampling and learning to record really effectively. And again, just helping out, he recorded for everybody. I mean, that documentary talks about it a lot where, if it was anybody, he'd record them. And just every step of the way is just an iteration and iteration and iteration. Um, in terms of getting live sound, I mean, the live sound industry looks super bleak right now. I don't think it's going to stay that way. Obviously, concerts are canceled. I mean, I lost a ton of revenue this spring, but I mean, what can you do, right? Everybody, you need to stay safe. That's the big thing right now. We got to get through it first before we can start looking ahead. But I'm surprised at how robust live sound is as an industry, even in a small town like here. When I first came here, there were basically no venues that had sound people, and there's what two or three now. It's the ultimate trial by fire, I think. You know, practice mixing in Pro Tools as much as you can, um, but nothing will hone your mixing chops faster than being shoved into having to do live sound somewhere. Um, Especially monitor mixing. Monitor mixing is way harder than people give it credit for, uh, but it's also super rewarding because if you do it well, the musicians remember this. I distinctly, I've worked with a handful of pretty well-known national acts, and they when they aren't traveling with a monitor engineer, and I've done mixes for them, they've remembered if it's good. They remember if it's bad too, but um, I think the big thing is just trying to get in the door. That's a hard thing, but I mean, keep trying, keep doing stuff. What kind of stuff are you mixing or making right now?
Well, right now I'm just doing like what I can on Ableton because I don't have Pro Tools yet, but my school provides a free Pro Tools, so I need to download that. But I'm just filling out keyboards, seeing what instruments work together, seeing what instruments I like. That's pretty much what I've been doing. And as far as mixing, I'm just mixing. My teachers show me how to get old songs to mix, like Michael Jackson and stuff. So I just try to train my ears on the sound quality of the mixing and learning what each plugin do and stuff like that. So not pretty much. I can't do much now, but yeah. And as far as the guitar aspect, you said the to practice playing with a song you like, but when it comes to learning how to play the notes, how you start playing the notes, like as far as that aspect, I don't really know much.
Sure. Yeah, I think that um, I grew up playing piano and saxophone, so I ended up reading music from around the same time I learned to read, words, which was admittedly a little bit of an advantage of that because I learned to play guitar largely by looking at tablature for songs that I liked. And if I knew those songs so well, the tablature was pretty easy to read because that's the downside of tablature is you kind of need to know what's going on first. However, once you've got that going, I just started um, doing the best that I could to match like the fifth fret on the A string is a D, for example. And so like if you're playing, that note right there, it sounds the same as the open D string. And so I just figured it out from there, basically. Um, the Fender series seems to do a pretty good job of getting at all that stuff. I'd start with both, right? Like one side, I always think that you have to do two things when you're doing learning an instrument is you have to work on the technical, like just the plain how do I do this thing aspect, but then you also have to work on something that's going to give you the want to keep going, right? Because learning all the notes on a guitar or a bass is kind of a boring task in and of itself unless you do it in some other context. Um, so for me, that context was always just learning songs. And anything that you can find that has tablature but also has the chords written out will help you learn it quicker. There's also a site called musictheory.net, and musictheory.net has a whole fretboard identification deal. So you can say, I think you can ask it like what note is fifth fret on the D string, all that kind of stuff, which is kind of useful for at least like quizzing yourself. It's worth trying at least. As far as all the software and stuff that goes, I mean, you can do pretty good work in Ableton. Most of my students use Ableton and really dramatically prefer it because they're doing so much self-production, where they're using a lot of synthesizers and things like that. One thing I think Ableton does really well is that it allows you to play with form so intuitively and so cleanly. It's a little tricky to mix in Ableton, I think, but it's not impossible, and you can still learn an awful lot of stuff there. If you just use the plugins that are there in Ableton, that's also super useful because like the EQ in there is good. And it's easy to see it in a bunch of different ways. The compressors are pretty good, and it's really easy to see what's going on with a compressor in there. I almost always use Ableton for my demos of compressors, honestly, because it has so many different visualizations of it. I find that not everybody can read, you know, a VU meter to see the gain reduction, and some people can't read the vertical charts very well, but a lot of people can read the chart that runs along like this and then dips the audio whenever the compressor engages. And I think once you learn to see that, often that helps you encode it into your ear of what that actually sounded like too. So you have some sort of quick feedback that something happened right there. And you also have a little bit more time to look at it as it's scrolling across. You can see it's like, you know, I see that that went down there now. Can I try to hear it the next time it happens? That's where I think Ableton's like actually really useful with what comes there. I mean, good for you for having Ableton. I mean, it's a super powerful creative software. It's what I usually write in. I use Pro Tools for everything else, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Ableton is good. I just in school we never got the chance to go over Ableton because we were still learning Pro Tools. So I'm using YouTube channels for the most part to like help me understand Ableton. And can you tell me what was the other? I think you said it was Fender.
Yeah,
Fender.
Fender. Yeah, Fender, like Fender guitars. They have it here. I can I think chat that over. Whoops, putting a whole bunch of spaces on there since I was holding my microphone open.
Yeah.
Fender for guitar lessons. That's not an endorsement or anything. I just am saying that I came across it recently, and I know it's free for a couple of months. That other site was this one, 3.net. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate the
course.
advice too.
Yeah. I think Ableton's cool because, I mean, they all work, right? All these DAWs work, but Ableton does work differently than the other ones. And it's more of a creative platform, I think, than a documentation platform. And I know that that's, you know, true with Pro Tools too. You can be super creative in Pro Tools. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, I think I cut you off, Omari.
No, it's all right.
Hey,
Thank you.
hey. Okay, I apologize. I wanted to, let Devin get his full answer. My name is Amari. I'm an alumni. I recently graduated back in October from SAE. I just have like a couple of few questions. Being that everything is so expensive in audio as is, if there were any like free plugins you may recommend for like free, maybe just EQs or compressors, even pitch controls, anything like that. And I have also a second question, and to answer this as best as you possibly can. My brother and I, we are performers. We started, we started this entire audio journey as artists, and we really gained our passion. I gained the passion for audio through SAE. I was completely new to it, knew nothing about it. I've had the opportunity to do some live sound gigs, which the live sound industry has come to a complete halt lately, but I still have the interest there. But I did want to start bringing my own microphones to some of these venues and start investing in my own live sound equipment. So maybe I could possibly start hosting some of my own events. If there's any equipment you may recommend to start with that's not like too costly, I would definitely appreciate any advice you have for as far as like the free software plugins and maybe just some live sound equipment that maybe I can start investing in to better my live performances. Especially because sometimes you pull up to venues and a lot of times the equipment that they have is really just subpar or not professional grade, and we really want to start pushing professionalism. So yeah.
Do you sing or vocalist, or what sort of?
We're rappers really. Like we're MCs as far as things go. So yeah, we like real tight vocals and like spaces and things of that nature. We're mainly hip hop artists. We're not too heavy on the vocalist and don't have a lot of octave vocal range, but like we get busy. We get busy on the mic, so.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think there's great resources for all these things out there. On the plugin side, I think somebody just posted the plugin boutique link. They have a whole free section for sure, which is cool. I think like Pro Tools Expert or one of those sites they always curate like a free site. Acoustica has a couple good ones. They just did a free emulation of a Pultec EQ that's available right now. My only complaint with them is that their plugins are giant. So it's like 200 megabytes, which is kind of a lot. Beyond that, while you have student discounting, that's always worth trying to take advantage of, because some of these things are pretty quick. In terms of the free stuff, honestly, I signed up for emails from most of the like plugin manufacturers that I have liked over the years, like say Waves or I don't have a Universal Audio System, but their stuff, or Sound Toys up in Vermont, and they often give away a free plugin every now and again. And I've just made a point of always grabbing it whenever it comes up. Sound Toys gave away a really cool weird equalizer a while ago, and it's good. I use it. Beyond that, the big thing is just learn what you've got. If you learn what you've got really, really well, that goes a long way, obviously.
I just invested in a Fab Filter bundle, and they're amazing. They're amazing. It's been bringing all new life into some of my mixes. So yeah, that's been good. And I appreciate that advice. Of obviously using what you got. I was using stock everything. I've mainly used Logic, but I've been using stock everything, and it's been, even with the Fab Filter bundle, it's like night and day with my old mixes. You know what I mean? But even my old mixes aren't that bad by any means. It's just still need to work out some kinks.
Yeah, I'm sitting in front of a rack I have like 4 bass amps sitting behind me right now, and I don't think one of them sounds better than the other, but I do think they all sound different, and I think I interact with them differently. Like the way that the controls are oriented, to me, makes a big difference. And I do think that that's one of the things that's really valuable. Is like I say, learn what you got, right? Because that's the obvious thing. But there's truth to the idea that using something different is going to change the way you interface with it, which might change the outcome. It might be accidental at first, and then maybe it's like, well, this one just makes sense to me. There's something about the way that boost works, or the visualization, or any of those things. Like Logic has great plugins by default. Their compressors are super particular. But having something different is super valid. Like I learned to use the Waves CLA, like the 1176 and LA2A and all that kind of stuff, and those are what I go to all the time because I learned them. I use other stuff too, but in terms of the building stuff up or acquiring gear and all that kind of stuff, it's an endless road, right? There's always something else. That's why I have so many bass amps sitting behind me, is that I've been playing professionally for the better part of 20 years. When we would tour, I would go to Guitar Center and look through their used section like all the time. And that used to be more of an option than it is now, but still, like I would make not daily, sorry, that's a little much. I would make a, say, bi-weekly trip to the Guitar Center in downtown Boston to see what had come in from, all the Berkeley kids who had traded stuff in. And I made a point of doing 2 things. Like anything that I bought, I wanted to make sure I'd still use in 5 years. And now I've extended that out to I want to use it for 10 years. So the first thing is like, don't buy cheap crap just to get something, right? With one caveat, which is that if you don't have
Agreed.
you need to do that, right? Yeah. It's okay to have a cheap interface. I have some like crazy cheap interface that I bought when I was in college, which, doesn't work anymore, but whatever. But anything that I would buy, I'd buy like the next level up, so to speak. I have taken very little equipment out of service over the last, 15 years because of that. The downside is you end up not buying as much. I think buying used is really strong. Reverb makes it really easy to buy used gear now, and it's way better protected than it was, when I was buying stuff off eBay. Like I bought this. This is like the most lucky purchase of my life, is that I bought a 1965 Fender Jazz Bass off of eBay, and it was actually what it said it was. So, but yeah,
right.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of live sound, the big things you need are some microphones, and honestly, like a Shure 58 is amazing. I mean, it always works. It does. Everybody knows how to use it. That's the thing that I found with when I was touring, but also when I get artists come through, the place where I do sound. is that if you have a 58, everyone knows how to use it. It's not so much that they love the microphone, but it's that it's constant. Everybody knows
Yeah, it's like
what it
industry
sounds like.
standard.
Yeah, like if you cup the mic, it's going to do that particular thing. If you're right up on it, it's going to make you a little muffled. If you come back, it's going to get a little bright, which is true of most microphones. But the rate at which it changes is what everybody knows. And the good vocalists, like I'm sure you know this from doing this, is that you play the instrument, and the instrument's your voice and your microphone. So to that end, I do think it's incredibly valuable as a vocalist of any sort to have your own mic. I think the hygiene aspect of it is something to be said also. It certainly is right now, but we always toured with
Right.
Yep. I'd keep a 58 in my
That
guitar
is,
bag.
that was another thing, using some mics, like I don't know who spit on this mic. I don't know what they did with it, because people do crazy things, artists just naturally do that, because they're entertainers. So they do some wild things with some mics.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, man, if you play clubs in New York, you want your own microphone if they'll let you. But yeah, I used to sing in a Shure Beta 87 because I liked it, and we played it was like a singer-songwriter band, so it was pretty. You could handle like high fidelity stuff because we weren't super loud. But I'd throw that requires phantom power, and I'd throw a 58 in my guitar bag just in case, because I hated using club mics. So honestly, like a decent vocal mic, and it's going to be different for everybody. A 58, you're never going to be mad that you own one. In terms of the other live sound stuff, I bought a handful of those QSC K10 monitors, or I mean PA speakers, and they can cover just about any venue.
The PA speakers.
Yeah. And they're not.
What was it called one more time? The QA.
It's
just
QSC.
So I can look into it and like do a little homework.
Yeah, the brand is QSC. I mean, there are tons of these out there now. I just happen to own these, and they were the QSC K10. And sometimes you can find them used. They've all been through the ringer, but But that's really all you need,
this
right?
is just a mic, a PA speaker, potentially in the future a mixer. You know what I mean? So I can add a little more life to the live performances. And I appreciate your time, Michael. I don't want to take too much because somebody else might have a question on. But I'll definitely I definitely appreciate the advice. And then the mic address, that's golden stuff, because I think I could use work there. But it's a work in progress stuff. Thank you for your time, though, Mike.
Oh, of course, yeah. And for studio stuff, a decent condenser mic is totally worth it. You have a 58, which I mean, like Bono of U2 recorded half their records on a 58, and they have as much money as they want for equipment. But having a decent condenser mic makes a difference too. And there are so many more good ones right now that like I'm reluctant to even mention any of them because they've gotten rid of some of the like harsh, bright, crummy sound. SE makes really nice mics for not super expensive. They're all studio use, but yeah, versatility. Yeah, does anybody else have any thoughts, questions, backgrounds?
I have another question. Like kind of going off what Omari said. Like what are some of your favorite plugins that you're using right now, like when you mix vocals and stuff? Like I've really gotten like familiar with Waves, like you were saying, like the CLA 76 CLA 2A, so I've been using a lot of those compressors too. But I've kind of been seeing a lot of people use like Neutron and Isotope plugins, and so Slate Digital. So like, yeah, what are some of your favorites?
I have all of those that you just mentioned right there, and I really like those two Wave plugins you mentioned, the 1170, the CLA 76, and the CLA 2 or whatever it is, the LA 2A thing. Those two things sound amazing. I have models of the LA 2A from Apogee as well, and I don't know, somebody else. And they all sound a little different. None of them are exactly the same as hardware, but I kind of don't care, right? Because I'm not trying to match the hardware. I'm trying to use the thing. I don't have an LA2A in my rack, so if it doesn't sound exactly like it, like that's not going to be the end of the world to me. One compressor that I really like is the Empirical Labs did a version of the distressor called the Arouser, I think it's called, and that one sounds great. Slate is super cool for how inexpensive it is for so much stuff. And I think their plugins sound really cool. They have a distressor as well that sounds really great. Distressors right now are my thing that I've been going to a lot more than I ever did before. Beyond that, though, I have all the isotope stuff, and it's pretty ridiculous. It can do some amazing stuff that's really, really creative, because you can sidechain all the EQ bands on like on Neutron, for example. You can sidechain all the EQ bands, and you can make them all dynamic EQs, so that they only engage when something's happening, which I think is really cool for corrective use, but it's also really cool for creative use, because you can do some really interesting things there.
Yeah, it's stuff like
yeah,
that.
I love their really different approach to visualization. It's not a model of something. Like, it's not a skeuomorphic model of like the device. It's just a set of controls on there, and I think it works really well. They're crazy. Like, they're geniuses over there. And then the other thing I love is I finally bought Melodyne. I had been using Waves Tune for quite a while, and Melodyne just like so much better. It's really impressive. I think actually what's in Logic is really good too, and really similar to Melodyne. But Melodyne's a little bit on the costly side, but it works super, super well. I've been amazed at what I've been able to tune and tune without noticing, or time without noticing. But then also you can still do a lot of effects with it too. Beyond that, Sound Toys, that stuff's on sale for like half off right now, I think. They have the best delay unit I think I've ever heard, because I love delays. I mentioned U2 like 12 times so far, right? So like that chimey electric delay thing from the 80s is big for me, and they make some amazing stuff with that. Super creative stuff. A little costly, but they're a really good company, and they're nice people. Yeah.
What was the function of the distressor? I think you called it distressor.
Yeah.
What does that do actually?
It's just a compressor. It's, in some ways it's like the most okay, so they were developed in I think the late 80s or early 90s. So they're not really all that old, but they're a solid state compressor that I find can do a bunch of different things. Like they can sound a little bit like an 1176, a little bit like an LA2A, but they kind of just sound like themselves. They do add a bit of distortion. It's all solid state distortion, but it's still pretty cool. The plugin version gives you a bunch of interesting sidechain options too, so that you can control the amount of harmonic distortion within the plugin. You can drive it super hot. But the big thing is that they can be crazy fast on both the attack and release, and yet still have some musicality to them.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. I have to check those out.
Yeah, there's so much stuff out there anymore, honestly. It's just a matter of like finding something and sticking with it. I've spent too much money on plugins over the years, because I have all that Slate stuff because I needed it for a project, and I have it right now, but it's a subscription, and it's cool. It's really cool. There's some good stuff. They have good reverbs.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts, or what kind of music are you all making? Maybe that's a better question.
I make like melodic, like rap / R&B, like I guess you could say probably like a Tory Lanez or Bryson Tiller, or yeah, along those lines. So I use a lot of effects and reverbs and delays, and yeah, I always have a lot going on in my mixes.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, as far as it goes, a lot of us are from New York, so you're gonna get a lot of hip hop, R&B flavor. You know what I mean? That's kind of like the dominating force around us, just being in the urban culture in general. But I would totally love to mix a little bit more alternative and like even like heavy metal music. I got a couple of friends in some indie bands and stuff. But to get, working with, this is why like hip hop is so predominantly taken over in New York, because it's so much easier to just work with an MC and a mic. You know what I mean? Like you don't need much more than that. With a band, you got to have, there's work that goes into it. So, I hopefully in our foreseeable futures, we can kind of expand. I know EDM is huge right now. If I get a chance to mix a little bit for EDM, I'd definitely like to do that too. But mostly hip hop and R&B, man. That's New York. New York to the death out here.
Well, that's good too. And whatever we all have a basis in some sort of genre or like style or something. That's definitely like, I don't know many people who don't actually have like a thing that they really, really enjoy doing, or that they're super informed by doing. And, when you move outside of that genre and that world, that's where you become super valuable in a way, because you've got this background that's informed by something that's different than what the other person's doing. And I find that to be really, really valuable. You want creativity on the whole thing, right? Like recording engineers need to be creative. Like you're part of the creative team. You aren't just a documentary. You aren't just a technician. You're part of the creative team. So whatever genre you're coming from and whatever you're working in, that's good. Like I listen to hip hop, but I've never really worked in it all that much. And when I have, I find that I have a different approach to like how I think about things with it. But I get a lot from the people I'm working with, and I tend to take that back to other things. Like for example, the way the bass is treated. I mean, I know I've said I'm a bassist, but like bass is hard to mix, and hip hop and electronica do amazing jobs with the low end, and it's trying to figure out how to get those sounds out of one of these things. It just doesn't quite work. Yeah.
As far as it goes, it's like I like that you mentioned about the, to me, the industry, the disparity between producers, like beat makers, instrumental makers, the creators, and musicians and engineers is very misconstrued. When people see that I've been to school, they're like, oh, so you make beats, right? And I'm like, not exactly. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I mix audio, and it's so hard to explain. I really hope that in some sort of foreseeable future that people start reappreciating engineering, audio engineering, and it's really sound manipulation, frequency manipulation at its best. And people hopefully in the foreseeable future where people can start appreciating engineering for the art that it really is, because it's art. The most thing I've learned from SAE, based on all my instructors and professors, they would always say there's no right or wrong. Like anytime we'd be like, well, how do you use the EQ? What's the right setting? They're like, there's no right setting. You know what I mean? Like there's always like, it's really like, it's flavor, it's taste of ear. It's like seasoning, you know what I mean? Like cooking, there's no right way to cook. I mean, there's a good way to cook and a bad way to cook. Same thing, you know what I mean? But like, I think, hopefully in the foreseeable future where, engineers should be more appreciated in this industry, because they add so much. Like without them, it's like, things sound pretty bland and flat.
Totally.
So,
and I think as the industry has moved towards smaller, more remote studios and that kind of stuff, like the big multi-room studio in New York is not like that big of a thing anymore, because it's just too expensive to maintain something like that. You end up having engineers who are also producers or anything like that. But the point is that the engineer is creative and should be creative. How you choose to mic that guitar, or what microphone you choose to put in front of that vocalist, that makes a difference. It does change the emotional impact, or it can at least. That said, we also have to be careful to realize that like the most important thing is to capture the performance, right? Like if somebody has an amazing verse and your mic fritzes out, like that sucks, right? So the big thing is to have equipment that always works, and then you deploy it creatively, and always be part of the creative process. I mean, yeah, you have to defer to the artist to a degree, but if you're nice, you're well nice. That's always like a bad term, but like, we're all trying to work towards the same goal, which is to achieve like an artistic vision. Maybe that vision is somebody else's vision, but nevertheless, we all want to be on the same page, or at least like contribute what we can contribute, because you're there for a reason. right? Like any of you who get hired to do a job, or if you're in the room, you're there on purpose. That's not an accident in most cases. And if it is an accident, take advantage of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely, I appreciate this, this time you're giving us, Mike, and SAE for even letting me, because I'm an alumni. I've already graduated and I've been trying to get my hands dirty in the field. And then, a lot of things were going right for myself. I got hired for a podcast to do some podcasting. That's a big field right now, especially in New York.
Yep.
I know audiobooks is a big thing too, audiobook editing and things of that nature. Had a good thing going, and then global pandemic just shut down everything. So I have to just be patient right now and kind of wait until things move along. So
right. And that's not an insubstantial point, right? Is that everything just changed. I don't think any of us know what it's going to look like in a month or 2 months or 3 months or a year or 2 years or whatever. It's all going to be really different. So if you have the luxury of, I have nothing to do, which is a weird luxury, right? Because like making sure that you can like keep food on the table and rent paid and all is probably more important. But if you've got that, think about what you can be doing to, think of this as the woodshed period, right? Or if you can, like with, which is to say, just work on as much stuff as you can while you're doing it. Admittedly, there's a lot going on. Like I'm at home in my studio right now, and I'm in principle teaching. Not in principle, I am teaching online. We moved a liberal arts college online, which is like kind of not an easy process to do. But my wife works full time. We have 2 kids, and they're both home from school. So like I have about half the amount of time that I did a month ago. So I'm viewing this as a just get through it time. But I know that if I were in my 20s, when I was working on a bike shop, and if our tour had been canceled, which it totally would have been, I think the big thing is to try to keep yourself occupied in a positive and forward-looking way, because the music will come back somehow or another. It's going to come back, and the people who are ready for it are going to be the next ones to jump forward. This could be your moment to break out. Work on stuff with people if they've got, even if it's like they've got a crummy microphone and can do something, but maybe it's the people who that you've encountered once or twice that you want them to like build a beat for you, and then you go to mix it, right? Like have them send you just stems or something. I can't think of what it's called. It's through Cambridge University. I think it's Cambridge. Mix. Oh, I'll come up with it in just a second. Mike Senior, he's one of the editors at Sound on Sound. He wrote this book called Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio. That's what it's called. And they have a repository of of multi-track sessions that you can download and practice mixing on. And I think they have like 450 of them now. So there's a ton of them out there. I feel like I need to find that. But it's worth checking out if you've got time. Yeah.
It was called the Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio. What was the name of the author?
Yeah, Mike Senior. Here, I'll send you. I'll put the link in the chat here. So I think I just found it. Yeah. There we go.
It's funny you mentioned, like even, offering my, engineering to somebody with a cheap microphone. I have a $20 microphone right now, just making it work. Like I'm going to invest in,
Sure.
Of course, a better, something better. But like I got a $20 microphone. My friend gave it to me as a gift. So it was like, okay, why would I say no? And I still, just me and my brother worked on a song over the weekend, and I mixed the hell out of that damn thing, and it sounds crisp, man. It sounds super duper crisp. The track we got is we're happy. We're both happy with it. We're like, yo, it sounds clean, man. Like, we're listening for pop.
Yeah.
The cable pops a lot. It gives you those cheap mic problems. But we're getting busy. It doesn't matter.
I was my music tech students, I don't have that many. There are like 10 or 11 of them, but they don't all have equipment, and most of them went home, right? And they're scattered across the country, so I can't just go drop stuff off at their places anymore. A bunch of them don't have anything other than like this little microphone. And you can still do stuff with that. I think it's worth, embrace what you've got. And if that leads you down a different path, like maybe that's not such a bad thing. I know Daniel Lanois talked about when he recorded Peter Gabriel's So, that Peter Gabriel had a Neumann U47 that was fritzing out, and it did this weird thing where it had none of the body of the voice. It was all the brightness up on top. And he had a tech fix it, and all it was a short in there, but it was a shorted cable, I think is what it was. But what he did was he had the tech fix it so that it had two cables coming out of it. So one of them had the short and one of them didn't. And then he mixed the two tracks together. And that's part of supposedly why Gabriel's voice is so bright on that record, is that they used the broken equipment for a good purpose. I mean, you look at the Ramones. I mean, the Ramones used cheap guitars, just whatever they could find. Nirvana too. I mean, Kurt Cobain hated expensive guitars supposedly. You've got what's around you, you'll do some cool stuff. Was it? I'm just blanking on who it was. Mac Miller, who recorded a whole record on his iPhone or something like that, using nothing but the mic and GarageBand or something.
I thought that was Kesha actually, but I hear you. And that it's funny how the little, when you do have little, you have to get very creative about your approaches to everything. It's made me very resourceful. I think, even with the financial hardship, it's like it made me more resourceful as an engineer, a little bit more hungry even, because it's like, I still want my stuff to be quality. I still want my stuff to as I'm going through a playlist, if I'm throwing in, one of my mixes and one of my songs into the playlist, I want it to almost have a seamlessness. I don't want immediately you could tell, oh, this is something Omari mix. It's like, you know what I mean? It just sounds crap. So, it's really having that transparency amongst other music where it fits, and trying to be resourceful about what engineer as far as things go.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the great equalizers of like modern production and everything is the use of virtual instruments on so many different things. It becomes about mix engineering more than it becomes about recording engineering, which is not bad. I mean, like, suppose you have to make a whole record with these like earbud things, and the mic on here is not amazing, but it's a little better than the one on my computer, I guess. If you're used to using an AKG C12 in the studio, like, you're going to know how to use this thing too. And you're going to know how to engineer as best you can with the equipment that you have. And that to me is the big thing. Like, how a mic works, and like specifically what it's going to do when you do this thing to it. Like, this mic's going to suck for drums, but maybe it would be awesome if that mic were like super compressed and thrown on the floor in the room next to a drum kit for like a break or something like that. Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap this up here?
No, for me, Mike, you're the best, man.
Hey, no problem.
You guys kind of sparked my interest into the whole like Omari mentioning the podcasting, and you guys both having experience in live sound. So I'm more of like just in the studio mixing, doing records and stuff. So I guess if I wanted to get into that, I guess just get into it. What should I do?
There's a couple of things you can do. I mean,
it's tight, man. Right now the industry's paused.
My computer just wigged out on me. I think I'm back now. In terms of getting into live sound's weird, right? It's right now it's particularly weird, so there isn't a way to get into it right now. But wait for a while, and it'll show up again somehow or another. So much of getting into the industry requires like having how do I say it? Not trying to worry about money at the beginning, which is admittedly an impossible feat to do, because I'm worried about it right now because like a whole bunch of my income just dried up, and that kind of sucks. That said, if you can't do anything else, like don't be afraid to try to do it for a buddy. Like, for example, if somebody who plays in a band, say, hey man, let me be your live sound engineer. You'd be surprised at how many bands will first off take you up on that and don't have their own engineer. There might be a house engineer there, so don't go in like totally blind or anything. But that's a good way to get at it. I wish I had thought of that a long time ago, honestly. I didn't fully realize this was a career until I was a whole lot older than I wanted to be. I grew up, again, as a musician. My dad's a doctor, my mom's a professor, my sister's a healthcare person, and I chose music. I came from a family of musicians for sure, but my dad was huge into jazz. My mom was really into opera. I didn't ever view I didn't like rebel by playing rock, but I mean, like, that was my thing. And I didn't realize that the technical side of it, like the recording and the engineering, was a thing, or that it was like a valid expression of art in there. And I 100% think that it is now. I teach at a college where, like, we're in principle, not in principle, we are a liberal arts school. It's all about reading and putting different things together. And I actually think that music production is a great example of that synthesis of a bunch of different topics and putting it all into one creative expression. So, it's a good thing to keep doing. That was super rambly, but
no,
welcome
you
to
know
what my
what?
classes are.
No, but this is, this is engineering at its finest. And, it's a lot of being on your toes as far as things go. Just on I've only been out of school 6 months, and I've gotten my experience with hosting dance competitions, a lot of engineering some shows, and that's not much compared to like someone of Michael's caliber. But it's really right now that like I said, like we all have to just sit tight, especially the live end of this industry, where there's big social gatherings and huge crowds. With us having to social distance, we really just have to be patient. And Michael made a good point when he mentioned this may be the time for, they might start trying out a bunch of new, the new faces. This may be our moment, when things do, when we find new normalcy. Because a lot of people keep talking about how they can't wait for things to go back to normal. I can't wait for the new normal, because we're the next, a lot of us graduating SAE, schools like SAE didn't even exist 10, 15 years ago. So it's like, we're really like lucky. We're the lucky ones. We're getting ahead of the ball, because this is a huge industry to get involved in. And I'm seeing it expand more and more. And the more I meet engineers, self-taught or not, school or not, like, I just admire the art of it all. Build the community. You can hit me up whenever, man. Like, we connecting through Zoom, but the world is getting smaller just by the day.
Oh, totally.
It's so easy to connect to people. So
and it's
definitely do it.
It's worth like thinking of now as a good time to collaborate. I mean, everybody's stuck at home. If they're stuck at home and they're in the music industry, they're going to be willing to collaborate right now, because they don't have much else going on. That's something I've been thinking about a lot, is like, how do I get my buddy who plays guitar with a touring band, and they had to cancel their national tour, and I think he had the virus, and he's recovered now, but like, I wanted to wait for him to get better before I asked him, hey man, can you throw some guitar on this track? But it's worth taking advantage of. It feels really gauche to say taking advantage. So it's worth using this time like effectively, if you can. If nothing else, it just gives you something else to think about, right? Like, I can't read the news before I go to bed. I have to read a novel. I can't do it. My wife reads like Facebook before bed, and I'm like, oh man, I just don't know how you do it. Like, I have to be somewhere else. I have to be somewhere totally else. I read novels whenever anything gets bad. And life is that way. That's just how life is, right? Is like, we don't have any control over the fact that this thing happened. All that we have control over now is like how we react to it. And it's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be like depressed. It's okay. And that's a valuable thing to remember. And try to do something that you wouldn't normally do. Like, I've been trying to run more. I've been trying to read more. I don't know. Honestly, I've just been spending time with my kids is really what it is, because that for me is like really what it comes down to. I listen to a lot of music, and I spend a lot of time with my kids. It's not making teaching easier, because there's a ton of work involved in that, but it's good. So yeah. Carla, I saw you hop on. Did you have something that you Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on
No,
the spot.
no worries. I'm actually one of the career advisors. I work with Hillary. So, thank you for this, because I think that you're right with everything going on. It doesn't make teaching, for example, easier, but it does make collaboration where otherwise maybe you wouldn't have. It does make it a little easier in that sense. Like Omari was saying, we're connecting through Zoom, and now this is a new opportunity for networking where maybe otherwise people, like, that light bulb didn't click in their head, of like, oh, I can jump on a Zoom call. Like, to give you an example, I've been doing that with my family back home. Every Sunday now we like hop on a Zoom call, and we're like, why did we never do this before?
Right?
So thank you but thank you for hopping on and, sharing with our students, because I think that that's what we really need right now. It's just to keep learning, keep growing, keep attaining as much knowledge as we can, so that when all this blows over, like Hillary says, we're ready to go and to dive right into whatever our next opportunity is.
Yeah. I mean, we all got to take care of ourselves, but also like realize that, music will go on. Somehow or another, it's going to go on. Because, what's everybody doing right now? They're listening to music, and they're streaming shows. Honestly, like, if you can get involved in post-production or film production stuff, that's a huge thing. Audiobooks are big. I've done it. Somehow I managed to do an audiobook for Audible here in Walla Walla because the author lived here. That was a stressful experience, actually, because everything has to be so on point with the engineering with it. Man, you can have a soundproof studio and still hear an airplane go over. And nobody wants to hear that when you're listening to a story about like a shipwreck. So
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, that's I had to do one job application for an audiobook, so yeah, I understand.
Yeah. I was thinking about the live sound thing and what you can do for that, and use whatever DAW you've got. Throw a channel strip of some sort on there, so like an EQ and a compressor, and set up a return path. So set up your console exactly like you would on a live console. Download one of those sets of multi-tracks and just do it as fast as you can. Not like sloppy or anything like that, but like sound check it for a minute. Like, hey, I'm going to do the kick drum like you would in a show, right? Because that's what you're going to do, is you're going to start somewhere and say, like, I need some signal from the kick drum. Now I need the snare, and I need the other things, just like you would in the studio. Go through that first, and then dial those in a little bit individually, and then ask the band to play live, which is going to be the whole multi-track, and see what you can do by the time that 4-minute tune is over. Like, see what you can do with the mix. You might be surprised, but that's really what live sound is about. That and understanding what the room sounds like. So to that point, like in terms of equipment, buy a microphone, buy an interface of some sort, and get good headphones. Good headphones are totally worth it.
Okay. That's how I kind of mix now. So yeah, I'll practice that while we're all in this quarantine.
Yeah, we don't all have the luxury of like sitting at a giant console in our house, right? I don't. So
yeah, I don't.
Most of us don't. Trust us.
Yeah. I don't know many people who do. Yeah. Cool.
Right, it's New York, man. These are shoebox apartments, man. It's just kind of how we got to make do. So we get busy with what we can and how we can.
Yeah, I thought Boston apartments were small until I visited my buddies down in like Brooklyn. It's like, oh my God, what is this? I liked New York a whole lot more when I wasn't having to drive to New York from Boston and gig, because like we'd get paid like $16 to play Arlene's Grocery or whatever, and then it would have cost us $40 in tolls to get down there, depending on which way.
New York.
Totally. It's an amazing place.
Yeah. So would you mind putting your contact information in the chat? So if anyone wants to reach out, they can. I think that.
Yeah, totally. Let me do that real quick here. Let's see. I'll give you my non-work. Well, it's still my work one, but it's not my college email, just in case. So, but yeah. There we go. That's me. Feel free to reach out. Totally feel free to reach out. I'll do my best to respond.
Yeah, we really, really appreciate this. You know, this is a tough time for everybody, and really, really appreciate you taking the time to connect with our students and our graduates. Again, you know, thank you so much.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me. Like, it's really great to meet all of you all, and I hope that you, I hope you stay healthy, stay positive, and I don't know, look towards what's next. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Cool.
If anyone has any questions, his email address is right there, or you could reach out to me and I'll give you his contact info. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for inviting the alumni, Hillary. You're
Of
awesome.
course.
You're the best.
Of course.
Talk soon, guys.